Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of ALPS In Brief. My name is Chris Newbold, Executive Vice President of ALPS, standing in for Mark Bassingthwaite, and for a podcast around an issue that's growing in importance, particularly out west, which is the requiring lawyers to have malpractice insurance. And so today I'm joined by Diane Minnich, who's the Executive Director of the Idaho State Bar, and Idaho recently became the second state in the country to require malpractice insurance for private practitioners as a condition of licensure. So Diane, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome.
So let's just maybe talk about just kind of how the concept in Idaho got started. What was the mechanism that triggered the discussion, and when did it take place?
Any rule change that is proposed in Idaho has to be taken to the Idaho State Bar membership for a vote. And so in this particular case, our president at the time thought that requiring malpractice insurance of attorneys was the right thing to do. She had done some defense work and felt like sometimes the clients were not being served well by those lawyers who threatened to file bankruptcy if they didn't, if you filed a malpractice claim against them. So she submitted that issue to our membership in 2016, and we go around the state and visit with all the lawyers. They all have an opportunity to vote. We talked with them. We had the people who were concerned and people who were supportive, and it passed by the membership. And once that happened, then we submit that proposed rule to the Supreme Court, and they adopted it in 2017. In 2018, licensing, which is this year, was the first year that it was implemented for all lawyers that were represented by private clients in Idaho.
Okay. Now the other state that requires malpractice insurance is Oregon, and I think your model is a little bit different than the Oregon model. Talk to us about what model you adopted and why.
The model we have is just basically open market, that every lawyer that represents private clients is required to obtain malpractice insurance in a 300, 300 are the limits. And we've looked at the Oregon model in the past, and I think our population of lawyers is just not large enough to support that particular model. And so we determined that to try it out in the, let everybody try to find the insurance themselves and determine what they want to pay and who they want as their carrier was the best approach for us given our size.
Okay. And so you required it of your lawyers to go into the open market, and was everybody who was required to get insurance, were they able to secure insurance?
As far as we know, everyone that was required under the rule to obtain insurance has done so. We had some that it took some time to do so. There were some concerns about cost, and so some people said they couldn't get it, and their real issue was the cost. We've learned since then there have been a few lawyers who didn't re-up their licensing because they didn't have insurance, and we're going to encourage them to go ahead and do the licensing, and then we'll work with them on insurance. And I think there was a group of lawyers who were on the verge of retirement, who, having to obtain insurance at this point in their career, made a choice to not continue to practice. And most of those that made that choice were close to retirement anyway, and it sort of was the thing that pushed them over that to make that final decision, which is, okay, I'm getting ready to retire now. I'm going to do so.
Mm-hmm. And how many lawyers in Idaho are there, and how many are kind of required to abide by the new rule?
Our total membership is about 6,500. Active members is 4,000, and I think we determined that lawyers subject to the rule was in the 3,000 range, a little over 3,000.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so again, you were the first one in the country to kind of really go down the road of an open market model. And so how, upon reflection, now that you went through one cycle, right?
Yep.
Getting ready to go on into a second year of a cycle, but just your general impressions of how you felt like it went, and the kind of the response from the membership.
We think it went relatively well. Everyone, like I said, who was required did obtain insurance. The questions we had were legitimate ones. We get a few calls from people that just are opposed to the concept. But many of the questions were house counsel, I'm a corporate counsel, how do I fit into the mix? Part-time practice is a big issue. I'm only going to practice part-time. Do I need insurance, pro bono? Those things I think we were able to deal with, and those were where most of the questions came from lawyers in terms of just trying to understand. Our rule is very simple, doesn't have any exceptions, doesn't have a lot of pieces and moving parts. So in some ways that's good because it allowed us some flexibility to make decisions about how we handled certain issues. This year we revised the form some. We're ready to answer questions. We revised the FAQ to be a little bit more in line with the questions that were asked. So I think we're ready to go. And the lawyers were really, even those that are opposed to the concept, were very respectful and professional about it. And once you explain to them how it works, most of them were very thankful. Thank you for answering my question, and went off and found insurance.
And do you know the number of uninsured lawyers that you generally had in Idaho before the rule was enacted?
Our best guess, we had mandatory disclosure of whether or not you had insurance prior to this, and have had it for a while, 10, 12 years. And so we figured in the range between 15 to 20%. It's hard to tell because our records were, you have to pull out public attorneys out of the requirement of malpractice. So you had to manipulate those statistics to try to figure out who really should have it and shouldn't. But I'm thinking 15 to 20% of the lawyers who are now required to have it did not have it prior to this time.
And do you think a majority of those were probably more private or solo attorneys versus those in firms? Or
most of them are smaller, either solo or small practices, yes.
Yeah. And one of the things that sometimes people who don't have malpractice insurance that are coming into the market, obviously a big question is price, right? And so any reflections on the price point in which people ultimately had to pay to come into the market?
We asked lawyers when they have to submit proof that they have insurance, so a deck page or a letter from the insurance company. We asked them to redact their premium amount, and many did, many did not. So we have a general idea. And I talked to a lot of people on the phone, anecdotally. From a part-time practice, it started anywhere from 500 up. Mm-hmm. I think of when I did sort of a random look at what people had, it appears that in the $2,000 to $3,000 range is probably where most of it, on a sole practice, a person, per person, was probably the average.
Okay. Yeah, because I know that obviously we enjoy a relationship with the Idaho State Bar in terms of your endorsed carrier, and oftentimes those coming into the marketplace without any insurance are coming in without any kind of exposure,
right,
in terms of their entry point into the market, which oftentimes enables them to get a credit, which pushes the price down at least early on in their career, and then as they gain more exposure, then the price ultimately goes up.
Yeah, and I think that's the question we're going to have this year. Is the price is going to go up for a lot of the people that got it for the first time, and just being able to answer that question, letting them understand that they have the prior acts has to be there as part of the policy. Yeah. So those I think are going to be what we're going to deal with in terms of questions from lawyers this year. Is everyone has it, and one would assume they can go ahead and just re-up their insurance, and we'll just the price is probably still going to become an issue.
Yeah. Now, the Idaho State Bar is a regulatory entity, yes?
Yes.
And so, as you think about I guess I'm curious on, how you see this particular rule falling into your regulatory authority, and ultimately, what was the rule enacted to protect or prevent?
I think a couple things. One is, the bottom line is, it does protect the public in terms of the clients who have lawyers, and if something happens that falls into the arena of a malpractice claim, that they have an option in terms of to do something about that. I also think, in general, if you talk to people, they assume lawyers do have insurance. It's interesting how many people I've said it to that were not lawyers that said, oh, I thought everyone did. And so I think part of that is just a perception that that's something that is the right thing to do, and that lawyers, like other professions, do, and for the most part in this country they don't. So, and I think it protects lawyers too at some level. If a lawyer has a client who's going to file a claim, they have some coverage too in case that is not legitimate, or they need help, or even if they did do something wrong, it can be fixed, because sometimes lawyers make mistakes.
Yeah.
And then that can be covered for them.
Yeah. Well, good. As you know, there are other states around the country that are also kind of taking a look at enacting mandatory malpractice. Nevada was looking at it, Washington's looking at it, California's looking at it. Any advice or counsel to those other bars that might think that this is the right type of rule that would protect the public and be important in terms of preserving confidence in the legal system?
I mean, I think all of those things are true. I think from a bar's perspective, it's the right thing to do. It's doable, whether you want to go with an Oregon model or our model. But it's a lot of work. I mean, I think from an administrative standpoint, if you're a bar, and you, especially a larger one than we are, the amount of time and effort it's going to take to implement something like this is something you have to take into consideration. That you also, these things don't just happen, and you want to do it right. And one of my lawyers and I, we answered all the questions ourselves because we wanted lawyers to know, we're listening to you, we're going to try to solve your problem, we're going to try to figure out how you fit into the rule, so that, and we can do that in a small state, be able to have that personal customer service so that they're feeling like, yeah, we have to do this, but they're listening to me and helping me get to the place that I need to be in terms of obtaining insurance.
Yeah. One final question: as the court enacted the rule, you obviously then had a period where I think you tried to do a significant amount of education, right, before,
right,
because this is all part of the annual dues,
license fees.
It's
part of licensing requirements. Obviously, they don't pay anything to us. But yes.
So talk to us about just kind of what you did in that lead-up period, because I think that will be important for others thinking about it.
We used all of our communication avenues, our magazine. I have an article. We have a weekly e-bulletin. And we wrote letters directly to everyone that we could determine should have it and didn't. Like, we could figure out through our database and who said, I don't have insurance through the mandatory disclosure. And we sent personalized letters to each of those people. Said, okay, here's the deal. Here's what's going to happen next. From our records, you indicate you don't have it, so that they knew ahead of time, like 6 months out, that that's what was going to happen next.
Okay. Well, good. Diane, anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap this podcast up?
I don't think so. I think it went.
I think
it went more smoothly than I anticipated it, and I'm just going to be interested to see how year 2 goes.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of adjectives that you threw out there was, doable, somewhat smooth, not a lot of negative member feedback. Obviously, some people weren't thrilled to have to kind of be subject to the new rule, but it seemed to go well for Idaho.
Yes, it did.
Well, good. Well, thank you, Diane. I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate the audience for listening in. If you have any other ideas for upcoming ALPS podcasts, feel free to let us know. Thanks and goodbye.